Hey everyone, welcome back to Living the Jesus Way with my guest Herman Hamilton, who has written an upcoming book on the subject. Let me start with something real. Earlier we talked about the importance of engaging with the level of story, but it's one thing to understand someone's story. It's another thing to actually love them, especially when we strongly disagree. Have you ever tried to be kind to someone and inside you're thinking, why am I even trying? Or maybe they've said something that feels like an attack on what you believe, and your instinct is to pull back or push back. That's real life. And that's why today's conversation matters so much, because if we're serious about building bridges across differences, it's not enough just to understand people. At some point, we have to treat people the right way. And that begins something that Jesus said that is pretty simple but challenging. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. And then he takes it even further. He says, love your enemies, not just the people who think like you, not just the people who agree with you, everyone. And I think you'll agree that that's not easy. But if we're going to break through the divisions that we see around us, love isn't optional, it's essential. So today we're going to talk about what love actually looks like in practice. Pastor Herman calls it radical kindness and radical empathy. Not surface level, not occasional, but intentional and consistent. Pastor Herman, I know that you've done much thinking and writing and preaching on the subject. In the fall, you're coming out with a book on the subject, correct?
Yeah, that's what we're working towards. Absolutely.
Great. We'll look forward to that. Well, let's start here. When Jesus talks about loving people, especially people we disagree with, what does that actually look like? And how does kindness fit into that?
The word that we translate love is really a word called, in the Greek, it's agape. Essentially, it is, I like to call it the Jesus kind of love, the highest level of love. It
Mhm.
is not rooted in sentimentalness. Dr. King used to say that Jesus said that he was very happy that Jesus said, love your enemies as opposed to liking your enemies. It's a distinction. It's hard to
Yeah.
like people who are bombing your homes and threatening your children, Dr. King would go on to say. But Jesus said, love your enemies. And then he'd
Mm.
go on and he would define this agape level of love. It's creative, redemptive love. The way I like to talk about it, it's a love that is other people centered, it's self sacrificing, it's unconditional, and it's redemptive. The way another great philosopher, Christian philosopher, has talked about it, it's willing the good of the other.
Mm.
That I want what's best for the other. That is the highest level of love. So it begins by just understanding what love is and what love isn't. One can work for justice and still engage their enemies with love. But what does that mean? That means that at the end of the day, even as I'm working to correct you or to hold you accountable, I refuse to allow whatever behavior you may have done that has hurt me or wounded the people that I represent. I refuse to allow that to cause me to hate you.
Mm.
And so love has a necessity of empathy, right?
Mhm.
That in order for me to have that posture, I have to assume that even though you're acting in ways that are dangerous and threatening, which suggests that I ought to have good boundaries and ought to make sure that I'm safe and all of that, the empathy, the compassion part comes from my recognizing that hurt people hurt other people,
Mm.
that broken people break other people. And part of engaging you at the level of story is actually here, you know, how life has wounded you or created a sense of fear in you that causes you to act or behave or speak the way that you're speaking. And that allows me to have conviction, meaning, I don't agree with you on X. I'm going to hold you accountable on Y. I'm going to debate this issue with you in an appropriate way, but also have compassion
Mm.
that I never cross the line where I'm dehumanizing you, that I'm always remembering that you're coming at this out of a place of a human experience
Mhm.
that has to do more often than not with fear or with pain. I like to say we somehow overuse pain. trauma. At the heart of a lot of our behavior and dysfunction and acting out is horrific trauma that has happened to us. And we become sources of trauma in other people's lives.
Yeah, and what I hear and what you're saying is that that kindness really isn't random. It sounds like it's intentional. It's a choice. Um, is that it's kindness is something it doesn't come natural, but it's a choice that we have to make along the way. So let me maybe we get a little bit more practical here is what does kindness really look like when you're dealing with someone you disagree with, or even someone who's coming at you pretty strongly?
Well, first of all, it's important for us to understand that when we talk about love, forgiveness, kindness, this is a point that we miss. It's other people centered, means we focus on their humanness, their humanity. We never lose sight of that, right? But it's first and foremost for me, for the point who's practicing it. Meaning, in today's culture, both in politics and in all kinds of other arenas, you see people choose meanness and ugliness as a
Yes.
response. And if you say, well, why did you do that? You say, well, they're mean, they're ugly. We have to fight fire with fire.
Mm.
Well, what that means is you're becoming more like the folk that you are fighting with fire. So kindness is first for me. It helps me not to become the very thing that I am opposing. Agape love is first for me. It inoculates my heart. It keeps me grounded to humanity that God is calling forth in me first and foremost. So I think that's important. I don't ever want to become like my enemy. I don't
Mm.
ever want to reproduce the hatred in my life that I have experienced in and through others. Jesus says, don't return evil with evil, but rather respond to evil with goodness. That protects your soul. So that is the first thing. Secondly, I think kindness and empathy always begins with listening, not yelling, not screaming, not telling, not condemning, not judging, but listening. This goes back to our previous episode, begins with
Yes.
listening and hearing one another's story. The kindest thing you can do is to listen. I was in, and listening happens in a lot of different ways. I was in Safeway the other day, and I was going through the cashier line. And this is just a practice, it's a habit that I have. The young lady that was checking me out, I noticed her name tag. I said, your name is Carol. She said, oh, yes, Carol. I said, where are you from? She said, Honduras. I said, wow, Honduras. I said, that's where you born and raised? She said, yeah. I said, do you enjoy how long you've been here in this country? She said, so 13 years. I said, oh, cool. I said, you have siblings? She said, there's four of us. I said, four of you? She said, yeah. I said, well, where do you fall in that? Are you the baby? She said, no, I'm second from the baby. And then she said, it's all boys except for me. I said, really? She said, yeah. And she says, as a matter of fact, now she's checking me out. She's still checking my groceries. And she says, as a matter of fact, when I arrived, my parents told me in a variety of different ways that they wanted to send me back, that because they wanted a boy. Now,
Really?
she just cracked open here
Wow.
a little pain in her life.
Hmm.
And so I leaned into that. I said, well, they may have thought that way because of how they think about boys and girls, but I want you to know that from God's perspective, you're not an accident. He wanted you. He knew that we needed you here.
Hmm.
You're an important part of what God is doing in the world. You should have seen her light up.
I
At
bet.
which point she finished bagging my groceries and I exited. I just talked with her about her story.
Yeah. Hmm.
And it was out of all the folk that she remembered when she goes home that night, there's going to be one conversation she's going to remember.
Yes.
Right now, it was not just an act of kindness from me to her. It was also an act of kindness from her to me.
Hmm.
She did not respond to me as a stalker, which she could have.
Hmm.
She did not respond offended. She didn't shut me down. She opened up in a real kind of trusting way, a delicate, vulnerable, precious part of her life. She gave me a gift. It was an extraordinary gift of kindness.
Hmm.
So, I summarize this to say kindness is extraordinarily powerful. And one of the greatest powers of kindness, at the end of the day, it blesses you.
Yeah, it does. It's interesting because you were kind in a very simple, in a very small way. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't a big thing. You just engaged with her, and I
Mm-hmm.
agree with you. I would guess that when she went home, she probably said, "I talked this guy, that I really just engaged with," because
Mm-hmm.
so many customers probably could come and go. So I'm sure you made a difference in her life, for that day. But it's also interesting. It's the my sense is that she probably responded to the tone you took. There was
Absolutely.
kindness and interest in your tone, and that that comes. You're talking about agape love, and that's what it is. Also heard you say something in the past that you've said that kindness isn't a weakness; it's a strength, and it's not passive. It's intentional. Do you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I think again, part of Jesus's role, the reason why God shows up in Jesus in the world, that in his son Jesus, God makes a counter argument because the world at its most uncivilized level argues, and it certainly was the case in that context when Jesus came, that power is best defined grabbing it and holding power and accumulating as much power as you can. That power has to do with lording over, being in charge, all of those kinds of notion of power, and that meanness and ugliness and hatefulness and all of that is a part of what's necessary to kind of rule the world, to dominate, to control, to be in charge, to keep
Yes.
yourself safe and protected. And Jesus made a counter argument. Jesus' whole life was a counter argument that no, love is stronger than hate. That forgiveness outruns uh, the need for vengeance. That life transcends death. And when Jesus died on the cross, it looked as though his argument lost. The resurrection is the proof that Jesus' argument won. Love is stronger than hate. Life is greater than death. Forgiveness is more powerful than revenge. And then he turns around and says to us who are Christians, and I'm primarily talking to Jesus followers, although I pray and hope that people beyond the boundary of Christianity can hear and internalize and engage with this. He says to Jesus says to his followers, now you are the light of the world.
Hmm.
And what he says is, now I'm empowering you. You go and let your life be a counter argument, right? And if we ever needed counter arguments to this notion of meanness and ugliness and hatefulness as somehow being the way to wield power, it's now.
Yes.
And so that's how I think about um, kindness as a power. It literally is just another expression of agape love. And I always say that love is the most powerful force in the world. It
Yeah.
heals, it builds, it gives life, as opposed to the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely right.
It moves towards justice. All of that's love.
Yep. Yeah. It certainly makes a difference. Well, that's very powerful, very helpful what you're saying. I want to touch on something earlier. You were connecting kindness with empathy. In fact, you've called it radical empathy. And,
Mm.
and maybe you can tell us, what do you mean by radical empathy?
Well, I think empathy has several components. The first component of empathy is an intellectual component. It's the intellectual space that we make in our brain, the intellectual awareness that says, whatever my argument is, whatever my position is, there's another side. That's an intellectual posture, right? It requires a sense of intellectual integrity.
Mm-hmm.
That whatever, here's how Paul talks about it theologically.
You're
We
talking about
see
the Apostle
the
Paul, right?
Apostle Paul. Thank you. Yes, yes, yes. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We see in part, we know in part, we prophesy in part. Only when that which is perfect has come will we know as we are known. And he's talking about ultimately standing in the presence of God. So here's what he's arguing. This is the Apostle Paul who gives us the bulk of the New Testament, who shapes Christian theology. He said, listen, we know enough to anchor ourselves in the salvation and redemptive work of God in Jesus Christ. But all that we know is still part. There's more to the story.
Mm-hmm.
So intellectual integrity requires, back to empathy, I need to have the intellectual posture that whatever my conviction and et cetera is, there's another side. Secondly, second component to empathy is I go from an intellectual posture to having a willingness through dialogue and discussion, not just trying to win an argument or persuade a person or convince X, Y, and Z, but to take some time and try to put myself in their shoes.
Mm.
That means I don't just need to know what they believe, I need to know why they believe, and I need to have a sense of what shaped it. And then I need to kind of imagine myself in their shoes.
Yeah.
In that context. Now, we can't do that perfectly. By the way, the incarnation is the perfect expression of that. This is God showing up in becoming human, right? And doing life, as the writer of Hebrews says, we have a high priest, referring to Jesus, who can empathize, the clearer translation, who can empathize with all of our weaknesses, because he was tempted in the same way that we are tempted, yet without sin.
It's a great example because it's not God removed, God, incarnate in our shoes.
Yes.
Understands us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah.
God shows up in our shoes to experience life from our perspectives. And one of the reasons why I'm a Christian, because when I pray to God and in the person of Jesus, I'm talking to somebody who knows what it's like to be me.
Right.
That's super important. Relatability. And then thirdly, the third component. So one is an intellectual posture. Second is a heart posture that says, I want to do the best I can to put myself in their shoes. That doesn't mean that I'm going to still agree with them, but I at least want to have I want to think about and try to feel what it's like to be in their context. That humanizes them. And then lastly, where appropriate, I want to feel the depth of compassion that moves me into action, that causes me to behave differently, to engage differently. Not necessarily calls me to see folk differently and believe differently, but it does cause me to see people differently.
Yes, that's where the radical parts. So not just to understand it, but really to see people differently and to act differently towards them.
Yes. And Skip, let me just give you a perfect example.
Yeah, please do.
Let's try to drive this home. I have to remember that we preachers, we think in abstract. Most folk in the pews are in concrete terms. So let's give you an example. Many of our listeners may have heard of the Good Samaritan story. It's one of my favorite stories to talk about this. Jesus constructed this story to teach about love, kindness, and empathy. And actually all these practices that we're talking to is in one way or another taught in that story. So the high level of the story is that there's a Jewish person who leaves Jerusalem going down to Jericho, which is a very dangerous road. People are getting killed and robbed on that road multiple times a day in that historical context. And he's attacked by thieves, beaten up, left half dead, and robbed. The Jewish priest and temple worker, they see the man lying on the side of the road, and they look at him and they leave him lying in his blood, bleeding out. The Samaritan, who is viewed by the Jewish person as being unholy, let's just use that term. They don't want anything to do with the Samaritans. And by the way, the reverse view was also the same, that they thought that they saw the Jewish people as oppressors and the worst examples of being faithful. Well, the Samaritan comes by, he sees this Jewish person, his arch enemy, lying in his blood. And where the priest and the temple worker left their own fellow brother, Jewish brother, lying and dying, the Samaritan comes and does what's right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, When we tell that story, Jesus tells this story. He flips all kinds of categories, but the first one is he's talking to Jewish people. They are struck that they are in the position of being the unholy one. But let's say that you could talk to the Jewish priest that passed by. You can interview him and you could say, listen, I think that what you did was just abhorrent. You actually passed by a Jewish person lying, bleeding to death, and you didn't try to help them.
Yeah.
That's abhorrent. Is there a story behind that? What experience kind of helped your calculation? And if the Jewish priest said to you, you know what, I kind of agree with you, but here's my deal. My brother was walking the same road a week ago. He got attacked and killed. Over the last 6 months, I've had 3 friends that have been attacked and robbed, etc. I saw the guy. I wanted to help him, but my fear generated by the loss of life, friends, and brother, I just couldn't trust him. He could have been setting a trap for me. So I walked by on the other side.
Yeah.
Now, you may disagree with the behavior and you may still say, well, that was wrong, but you see that priest differently.
Yes.
You have a different kind of respect for why he did what he did.
Mm-hmm.
Changes your interaction with him.
Yeah.
Over that issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very, very powerful. And the whole story must have been startling to the Jewish audience that was listening to it. Jesus just kind of reversed the way that they would have thought things would have happened, but you can understand. I mean, that's certainly a possibility why that priest, didn't go help.
That's right.
But certainly the Samaritan did. So it's really quite a story. And is there anything from that you've experienced in your own life, Pastor Herman, where you've seen either you've been part of it, where empathy has made a difference?
My whole story is about that in many respects, right?
Yes.
I was a scarred kid, 2 years old, about to be put in a foster home in San Francisco, California, and my grand aunt, who was in maybe her late 40s, early 50s, just got word to my mom, if you can get him to me, my grand aunt lived in Coshada, Louisiana, we'll keep him.
Yeah, I mean, your grand aunt could have said you just avoided it, right? She could have just walked by.
Absolutely, she had no obligation.
No, and I'm old, and
Right.
I don't need to deal with this young kid.
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't, but her heart went out, empathy.
Yeah.
She opened her doors, kindness. They brought me in, and I got there 2 years old. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 4 years later, my biological mom would come to collect me. But by then, my grand aunt and grand uncle, they didn't have any other children. The bond between us was like parent and child. And so now my biological mom, out of a place of empathy and kindness, makes the horrific decision to let me stay with them and let them raise me as their own child. Now, part of what drove my biological mom to make that decision was her remembrance of how my grand aunt had been kind and empathetic towards my biological mom when she was 13, 14, 15 years old, growing up in a house where her father was horrifically abusive. And my grand aunt stepped in and essentially saved my mom, brought her out of that context, put her in a home. And my biological mom grew up and got out of Coshada, but she had that safe haven for my. So when she saw that my grand aunt now was treating me like her own son, she saw this as an opportunity, remembering the kindness that had come to her, and being empathetic about the fact my biological mom had, by then, I was the 4th kid. My grand aunt had no kids, had been told she was barren. Empathy and kindness caused my biological mom to give me as a gift to the grand aunt that raised me.
Yes.
Saved my life.
Yeah.
I could say it like this, Skip. Empathy and kindness saved my life.
I can see that. It's an amazing story. So how do we, any other things you'd say, any other practical ideas when we're dealing with somebody who we, disagree with, somebody who might have offended us, in some fashion. And, the reaction is almost, as we talked earlier, to strike back at the person, to really, they've hurt us, to really hurt them. But as we're talking, radical kindness and radical empathy says, no, that's not really the way that we should react to other people. And we've mentioned a few things like it's good to kind of try to get their story and to listen first and ask questions. Anything else that you'd add to that are practical ways we can begin to create more of a sense of kindness and empathy with somebody that we strongly disagree with?
Yeah, I think the empathy begins again with getting to know who they are and their context. Kindness also includes a few other things too. It does include having real boundaries,
Hmm.
right? And I think if in fact you're trying to preserve a relationship and there's significant disagreement, it's about engaging with the person and saying, "Look, I want to prioritize the relationship over this area of disagreement. Let's figure out what the boundaries are going to be."
Give me an example of what boundaries might you put in place.
Well, I like to tell the story about my grand aunt, not the grand aunt who raised me, but her first cousin. Her granddaughter, who she raised, came home one day and shared with her that she was part of a same-sex relationship, and it was totally theologically inconsistent with my auntie's view in any
Hmm.
way that you can imagine. But my auntie was absolutely known for loving and caring for her kids and her grandkids. So she said to her granddaughter, "I'm not going to change how I react to you guys. You bring your friend with you. She's welcome to come eat at my table. I'm going to treat you just like I would treat anybody else." And she did
Hmm.
lavish love. She said, "But I do have one boundary, and that is if you guys are going to sleep together, you're going to have to get a room. You can't
Hmm.
do that here because that's where I draw the line in
Yeah.
terms of my values versus your values."
Yes. Yeah.
And even if I have to help fund that, that's fine. But I have to draw the line here.
That's
And her
wonderful.
granddaughter respected that. And at my aunt's funeral, the female spouse of the granddaughter spoke. And she said about my aunt, "I've never experienced more love from anybody in the world than this lady lying in this casket."
Wow, very powerful. Yeah, so the setting a bond doesn't mean that we go all the way with someone. Yes, we love them. Yes, we're empathetic. Yes, we're kind to them. But we need to set some boundaries often with them.
It's conviction with compassion.
Ah, that's a good way to say it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's conviction that makes space for compassion. That is the Jesus way. The other thing about kindness is it also requires us to speak truth. I always like to tell this story that I don't know, maybe too graphic for this, but I was on my way out to preach, and my fly was open, and the team around me, they had a choice. They could be nice and not say anything, which has been horrific, or they could be kind and say, "Hey, your fly is open. You can't go out." Right? So kindness is exactly what Paul is talking about when he
Yeah,
says, "Speak the truth in love," meaning the motivation for speaking the truth should be love.
yeah.
The goal that you're trying to achieve should be shaped by love. The tone in which you engage and speak the truth ought to reflect love.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean that you can't be passionate. That doesn't mean that you can't engage in debate. But at the end of the day, the folk who you're engaging with should experience that you're not calling them names,
Yeah,
not dehumanizing them. But you're able to take apart the issue without taking the person apart.
yeah, yeah.
So then they look back and think about their relationship in terms of how you engage with them. They got both truth, but they got it in love.
Right. Well, let me just say this because it's kindness and empathy is not easy
No,
sometimes.
no, no, no.
Sometimes it can feel undeserved when somebody has really, mistreated you or whatever, it feels undeserved. And sometimes empathy can be a bit risky. You say, like, why should I be the one to take the first step? But that's where living the Jesus way is different, isn't it?
That's
It
correct.
doesn't wait for the other person to go first.
That's right. Kindness, empathy is risky. Yes, it can be rejected. Kindness does not always work in terms of creating or facilitating the response that you would hope for. Kindness and empathy does not always bring the kind of healing to relationships that you would hope for,
Right.
so that there will be reconciliation. It's a powerful beginning. If there's any hope for reconciliation, if there's any hope to transform that relationship,
Yeah.
it comes through kindness and empathy.
Yeah. 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 Well, that's a good way. Maybe it's a good way to end this discussion because if there's any hope,
Mhm.
that's what we're looking for
Mhm.
is that hope if we act in kindness and empathy, that there's a chance that that relationship can be reconciled.
And I want to just say one more thing is this
Sure.
before I let you go. We also need to think about the fact that kindness and empathy often operates like seeds in the lives of people.
Hmm.
You respond to them with kindness. You respond to them with empathy. You may not experience the fruit of it, but years later, because of your kindness, because of your empathy, that person may experience transformation down the road,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they will connect it to, you know what, I was in this, I had this friend Skip, and we had a major argument, broke our relationship, but he never dehumanized me.
Yeah.
He always tried to understand my perspective, even though he disagreed. And God has a way of using stuff that happened. And everybody listening to me, you can think of stuff that may have happened 5 years or 10 years ago. It took that long for it to mature in your life,
Sure.
have a transformative experience.
Yeah, but I think that's an important point because you can't, it doesn't necessarily, there aren't immediate results
That's right.
necessarily. It could happen over a long period of time, but the important thing is to really take that step out of kindness and empathy with other people, and then there's the hope, as you say, of building that relationship or restoring that relationship.
Let me just add one more point that I think is incredibly significant as we talk about kindness. And we can talk about it in a kind of a narrow focus in terms of how do I respond, particularly across differences. And that's super, super important. But ultimately, we want to go from being individuals who practice occasional kindness to individuals who are just kind.
Hmm.
That at the end of the day, when Skip, when you and I leave the planet and people are trying to think of words, when I sit down and talk to folk, and I'm preparing for funerals, I usually say, give me one word that best captures the person, the deceased. And I go around from family member to family member. Well, in your context, in my context, I would hope that when people try to describe Herman Hamilton, that one of the words that they come up with is kind.
Yes.
So I would challenge the listeners and the viewers of this to think, when people think of you, is the first or second or maybe even the third word that come up, would it be kindness?
Hmm.
And if the reality is different, then I think the larger challenge for us is to become kind people. And I want to give you just some practical ways to do that.
Yeah.
And first is, we have to adopt kindness as a value. It has to be one of our core values that we
Yes.
live by, these three or four things. And one of those three or four things has to be kindness.
Hmm.
Say that I'm going to treat people with a sense of respect and kindness. It was a core value for my grand aunt. It just
Yeah.
infused her. And I can just think of, there were 1,000 ways that she kept reinforcing as she was raising me. You got to be calm. You sit in the back and let the elderly person sit up front. You got to be kind. If you see me coming in with groceries, you get up and come help me get some groceries. You got to be kind. That when we had extra stuff, sometimes Thanksgiving, whatever, and she'd share some of that stuff with neighbors, and I had to go from
Hmm.
neighbor to neighbor and carry it out. What does it look like to train myself to be kind? Because we can do that. We can train ourselves to be kind. One is, think of two or three habits that you can practice. I have several habits that I practice. We talked about this a few moments ago. I tend to, just as a habit of kindness, when I'm walking, when I'm dealing with cashiers, waitresses or waiters in a restaurant, when I come across custodian workers, male or female, I tend to pause a few moments, ask for their name, and usually engage them, ask a little bit about who they are and their story. I tend, just as a habit of practice, I tend to say thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. It's making a huge difference. I'm so grateful that, I'm in the store at 10:30 at night and the cashier's there. I'm so grateful that you're here at this time of the night serving folk like that. That's just a habit of mine.
Mm.
So I want to challenge you to think through, what are 2 or 3 kind habits that you can execute? You can do them with family, friends, or strangers. You can even do them with folk who don't merit kindness, because that's the ultimate power of kindness, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't merit it. So you're practicing kindness not because of who they are. You practice kindness because of who you are.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great point. What a legacy that would leave if you're known as a person of kindness. It reminds me when Jesus says, "Turn the other cheek," right? Instead of reacting, kind of someone violently. If you're kind to them, it can make a difference, in their life.
And I know you're trying to, just one final thing here.
Sure.
Kindness and empathy is hard. The absence of kindness and empathy is harder.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's going to always lead to destruction and pain. It's that cycle of violence and pain.
Yeah, very good point.
Kindness and empathy offers the possibility of breaking that cycle and moving forward.
Yeah, and I think if you look at our experiences, that's the way it happens, right? I mean, the reaction is, if somebody is unkind to us, to be unkind to them, and it just goes back and forth, and it doesn't really lead any place. And that's where, the Jesus way says, no, let's do things a little bit differently. And then there's the hope that those relationships at some point can be restored.
That's right.
Pastor Herman, thank you for sharing your comments on kindness and empathy as powerful ways to overcome differences and build relationships. As you said, practicing kindness and radical empathy is neither easy nor risk-free, yet it is often the first step toward restoring broken relationships, and it's worth the effort. For our audience this week, give some thought to someone with whom you may have a broken relationship, and consider how you might act with kindness and empathy to help restore it. Maybe it's a small, intentional act of kindness. Maybe it's taking time to really listen and understand something the other person cares about. And here's the key. Do it without expecting anything in return. No scorekeeping, no immediate payoff. Just a genuine act of empathy and kindness. And then pay attention. How does it affect the way you see them? How does it affect the way you feel? You might begin to relate differently. That small act of kindness may not change everything overnight, but it just might be the first step toward building a new relationship and building the kind of world Jesus would have us create. Well, thanks for joining us to discuss living the Jesus way. Next time, we'll continue the conversation as we explore another step in building bridges across differences. Our topic is redemptive forgiveness. And if you're a leader, and most of us lead in one way or another, I invite you to listen to the companion episode, Leading the Jesus Way, Practicing Kindness and Radical Empathy, where we'll explore how these same principles apply in leading others. And you can check out past and future podcasts at skipvaccarello.com. The podcasts are also available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And to hear messages from Pastor Herman at NBCC, go to nbccbayarea.com. Thank you very much.